South Africa, known as the Rainbow Nation, has one of the most complex, layered, and fascinating histories on the African continent. Its story is shaped by early human origins, indigenous societies, colonial encounters, wars of resistance, industrial revolutions, racial segregation, and eventually one of the most remarkable democratic transitions in modern history. To understand South Africa today, its diversity, tensions, and triumphs, it helps to trace the path of its past. The cradle of humankind. South Africa is often described as the cradle of humankind. Archaeological discoveries in the Sterkfontein, caves and surrounding areas of Gauteng province have revealed some of the oldest hominid fossils ever found, dating back more than 2 million years. Famous finds like Australopithecus africanus, Mrs. Palm, Pless and Australopithecus sediba highlight the region's role in human evolution. These discoveries suggest that some of humanity's earliest ancestors lived, hunted, and innovated in southern Africa long before written history began. Indigenous foundations. Long before colonial settlers arrived, the region was inhabited by diverse indigenous communities. The earliest were the San hunter-gatherers who thrived across southern Africa for tens of thousands of years. Their rock art, still preserved in caves and mountains, offers a vivid window into their spiritual life and daily struggles. Later, the Khoikhoi, pastoralists herding cattle and sheep, migrated into the area. Together, the Khoisan peoples developed deep connections to the land, adapting to South Africa's varied environments, from deserts to coastal plains. By the first millennium CE, waves of Bantu-speaking peoples began migrating southward from Central and Eastern Africa. These groups brought iron-working skills, advanced farming practices, and new political structures. Over time, they developed powerful chiefdoms and kingdoms. Among them, the ancestors of today's Zulu, Xhosa, Sotho, Swana, and Swazi peoples laid the foundations for rich cultural and linguistic traditions that still define much of South Africa. Early European contact. The first sustained contact between South Africa and Europeans came through the Portuguese, who sailed around the Cape of Good Hope in the late 15th century. Bartolomeu Dias reached the southern tip of Africa in 1488, and Vasco da Gama followed soon after, opening sea routes between Europe and Asia. But it was the Dutch East India Company that left the first lasting colonial imprint. In 1652, Jan van Riebeeck established a supply station at the Cape of Good Hope to support ships traveling between Europe and Asia. What began as a modest outpost soon expanded into farms, worked initially by Dutch settlers, later known as Boers, and slaves imported from East Africa, Madagascar, and Asia. The Cape Colony became a crossroads of cultures, with Dutch settlers, enslaved peoples, and indigenous Khoisan societies interacting often violently. Conflict and expansion. As European settlers expanded their farms, they clashed with indigenous groups. The Khoikhoi suffered devastating losses from smallpox epidemics and land dispossession. Enslavement, forced labor, and violent frontier wars reshaped indigenous life. By the late 18th and early 19th centuries, descendants of Dutch settlers known as Afrikaners or Boers had developed a distinct identity, tied to Calvinist faith and a rugged farming lifestyle. Meanwhile, British forces seized the Cape Colony in 1795 and again in 1806, incorporating it into the growing British Empire. Tensions simmered between British administrators and Afrikaner farmers who resented British abolition of slavery in 1834 and British cultural dominance. In response, many Afrikaners embarked on the Great Trek during the 1830s and 1840s, migrating inland to establish independent Boer republics such as the Transvaal and the Orange Free State, Shaka Zulu and the Mfecane. At the same time, southern Africa witnessed dramatic upheavals driven by indigenous power shifts. In the early 19th century, Shaka Zulu forged one of the most formidable African states. Through innovative military tactics, strict discipline, and political consolidation, Shaka built the Zulu kingdom into a regional powerhouse. The rise of the Zulu sparked the Mfecane, meaning crushing or scattering, a period of warfare and migration across southern Africa. Many groups were displaced, new states were formed, such as the Sotho kingdom under Moshoeshoe, and the demographic and political map of the region was redrawn. The Mifekan left a legacy of resilience, but also deep scars, shaping relations between African societies for generations. Diamonds, gold, and industrial transformation. The mid-19th century brought a turning point. The discovery of diamonds in Kimberley, 1867, and gold on the Witwatersrand, 1886. These finds transformed South Africa from an agrarian frontier into an industrializing society at the heart of global capitalism. Mining attracted waves of migrants, Africans, Europeans, and Asians seeking fortune or employment. Johannesburg sprang up almost overnight as a booming gold rush city, but mining wealth also deepened inequalities. White settlers controlled the mines and land, while African workers were subjected to low wages, harsh conditions, and restrictive laws. The British Empire tightened its grip, determined to control the mineral wealth. This set the stage for explosive conflict with the Boer republics, which resisted British dominance. The Anglo-Boer War's tensions between the British and Boers culminated in the First Anglo-Boer War, 1880 to 1881, in which Boer forces successfully defended their independence. But the discovery of gold made British determination unstoppable. The Second Anglo-Boer War, 1899 to 1902, was brutal. The British deployed scorched earth tactics, destroying farms and interning Boer civilians, especially women and children, in concentration camps, where thousands perished. Ultimately, the British defeated the Boers, annexing their republics and uniting them with the Cape and Natal colonies. The war left deep scars, especially on Afrikaner identity, and entrenched racial hierarchies. Both British and Afrikaners agreed that black South Africans would remain excluded from political power. The Union of South Africa. In 1910, the British created the Union of South Africa, a self-governing dominion that unified the colonies and republics under white minority rule. The new state institutionalized racial segregation. The 1913 Natives Land Act reserved the vast majority of land for whites, confining Africans to reserves that later formed the basis of apartheid homelands. Africans resisted through organizations like the South African Native National Congress, founded in 1912, later renamed the African National Congress, or ANC, which sought political rights through petitions, protests, and diplomacy. Meanwhile, Afrikaner nationalism grew, spurred by resentment of British dominance and the trauma of the Boer War. Apartheid's dark shadow. After World War II, Afrikaner-dominated parties consolidated power. In 1948, the National Party formally introduced apartheid, separateness, a rigid system of racial segregation and white supremacy. Under apartheid, South Africans were classified into racial categories: white, black, colored, and Indian, each with restricted rights. Black South Africans were stripped of citizenship and forced into homelands, their movement controlled by past laws. Education, jobs, and public spaces were strictly segregated. Resistance grew. The ANC organized campaigns of civil disobedience, and leaders like Nelson Mandela, Oliver Tambo, and Walter Sisulu rose to prominence. In 1960, the Sharpeville massacre, when police killed 69 peaceful protesters, marked a turning point, pushing the ANC toward armed struggle through its military wing. Umkhonto we Sizwe. The apartheid government responded with brutal repression, imprisoning leaders, including Mandela for 27 years, and banning opposition groups. Yet resistance continued, supported by underground movements, trade unions, and international solidarity campaigns. The world increasingly isolated South Africa through sanctions and boycotts. The road to democracy. By the 1980s, apartheid was crumbling. The economy faltered under sanctions and internal unrest. Township uprisings, strikes, and mass protests made the country nearly ungovernable. Meanwhile, the Cold War's end shifted global politics, reducing Western support for the apartheid regime. In 1990, President F.W. de Klerk announced sweeping reforms: the release of Nelson Mandela, the legalization of banned political parties, and the start of negotiations. After tense years of talks, violence, and compromise, South Africa held its first democratic elections in 1994. The ANC, led by Mandela, won by a landslide, and Mandela became the country's first black president. His inauguration symbolized not just political liberation, but the triumph of resilience, forgiveness, and hope. The Rainbow Nation. The new South Africa was hailed as the Rainbow Nation, a term coined by Archbishop Desmond Tutu to celebrate the country's diversity. A progressive constitution enshrined human rights, equality, and protections for minorities. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission, TRC, sought to address the crimes of apartheid through testimony and amnesty, emphasizing healing over retribution. South Africa rejoined the global community, hosting the Rugby World Cup in 1995, immortalized by Mandela's iconic appearance in a Springbok jersey, and later the 2010 FIFA World Cup, the first ever held in Africa. Challenges in the modern era. While democracy brought political freedom, post-apartheid South Africa has faced significant challenges. Economic inequality remains among the highest in the world, with poverty disproportionately affecting Black communities.